over a person, talking down to them. And I have a feeling a hug is a great way to do that, or just standing next to a person, kind of getting into getting into their space, but not if the person is seated, not having the conversation while you're standing and they're seated, because that just has an energy of a power over energy that's not easy to take.
Probably the single most important lesson that my wife taught me with her Alzheimer's is that all she had was the moment. She had no yesterdays. We couldn't count on the tomorrows. All she had was the time that we were sitting there with each other. And that's been a spiritual lesson I've been trying to grasp for years now of living in the now and not projecting, not reflecting, but just to be in the present moment. And that was just an invaluable lesson that she taught me. And for that, I thank her. So now we're going to get to some heavy stuff. Many things happened within a very short period of time where I realized that I could no longer keep my wife home. First, my depression had gotten so bad that I couldn't even get out of bed some mornings. I had difficulty breathing. I was crying a lot. My boss at work said, you know, you're hired to run a program. We understand all that you're going through with your wife, but the reality is you come to work and you sit there. You're not able to function. Not a good sign. I was having great difficulty sleeping. Some of it was, I'm sure, the depression. Some of it was sleeping very lightly, because if she would get up during the night, I had to be up with her. Subsequently, I was taking more and more medications to help me through this. I had taken an online caregiver stress test, and unfortunately, I answered yes to every last question, and I realized that I'm in a burnout situation. The last couple weeks that Jeannie was home, she had 3 different falls, times where she would just trip over or fall down. Each time there was someone with her at the time. I was with her twice, Dory was with her once, and in spite of everything that we're doing, she would still fall. And that was very, very concerning to me. The last time she fell, I was at work. Dory called me to say, I have to take your wife to the hospital. Her arm is all torn up. By the time I got home, they had just returned from the hospital, and Jeannie was bandaged from wrist to elbow, and blood was seeping through the bandage. And I looked at her, and I got all teary, and I said, Jeannie, what happened to you? And she looked down at her arm. She said, well, I have absolutely no idea what happened. And I started crying. And I said, up until now, I've been able to help you, to protect you, to do whatever I needed to do to help keep you here. And I got to tell you, at this point, I'm helpless. I've run out of tools in my toolkit. I have nothing more to give you. And she turned to me, and she'd said this before, but this was the most impactful time. She put her hand on my arm, and she said, Mo, what would happen to me if something were to happen to you? And it was just knocked me down with a feather. So that night, I emailed many friends, including you, and I asked 2 questions. I said, when do you know if it's time, and what kind of things can I expect? Every single person returned the email immediately, and each of them said, if you have to ask that question, it's time. And know that it'll be far more difficult for you than it will be for her.
Well, that's what comes to me when I hear that part of the story, that you were so traumatized by this fall, and she didn't even remember. She wasn't. No. So you might not have been able to notice that at the time. You were more feeling that you couldn't keep her safe no matter what. But what I see when I hear that is that you were living the what ifs. And also, though she could be right in the moment, she was fine in that moment. She didn't remember how she felt. She wasn't worried about falling again. But you were living all of that. And that's another indication that, well, for me, it's an idea. What I think about is that we dread the idea of a nursing home, but in fact, it's not always a bad choice. Sometimes it's a really good choice.
Initially, I felt like I was a total failure, that I could not, with all my skills and all my love and all my abilities, I could not keep my wife at home. And this was very difficult for me. So I went out looking at nursing homes, and I had certain criteria. I learned enough about Alzheimer's to know that the people caring for my wife needed to have special training for Alzheimer's. that although many nursing homes believe it's perfectly okay to keep Alzheimer's patients with non-Alzheimer's patients, I didn't feel comfortable with that whatsoever. I was fortunate enough to find one nursing home in Greenfield that had a locked Alzheimer's unit. I went and looked at the facility. I talked to several friends who had family members there, and I decided that that's where Jeannie needs to go.
So let me get clear about this. A locked unit does not mean that the person can't ever leave the unit.
It just means that the door is locked so that they cannot leave if they choose to.
They're not going to wander.
Right.
But
right.
you know, was she able to have dinner, for example, in a dining room with a mixed population?
And I was able to come and take her out.
Take her out.
Yeah, but just she could not leave on her own accord. Someone had to escort her through the door.
So I want to back up just a little bit because the other thing that I think is important is that the denial piece of this, that it's not just that you'd failed her, but this was your retirement home.
Yeah.
Perfect house for the two of you to grow old together. So there's a loss also that's happening, and you could no longer deny the progressive aspect of this condition.
Yep.
So there's a huge loss when we have to give up denial,
Yep.
really saying, okay, this is progressive. We aren't going to live out our retirement years together here. That's sometimes I think that the primary caregiver kind of holds on, maybe hoping for that miracle, or maybe if I just don't look at it, it'll go away. So it's not just for failing her as a caregiver, but accepting the fact that the plans that you'd had for life,
Yep.
you had to face all of that in making this decision.
They say if you want to make God laugh, tell her your plans. And it was very difficult. So at this point, I checked out the nursing home. I had she was on a waiting list. I had scheduled a little one-day trip to Boston for the two of us. A couple days earlier, I got a phone call from the nursing home within a week probably of me putting her name in saying, we have a bed for you. I said, I wasn't ready for this. First of all, it was difficult. I said, let me call you back in a little bit. I went out to my car and I cried for about 15 minutes and came back and said, I've planned this trip. We're going to go next Monday. Is it possible to hold that room so that Tuesday she can come? They said, fine, that's fine. So we went to Boston, had a wonderful visit. On the trip back from Boston, I asked her how much she enjoyed the trip, and she said, oh, Mo, I haven't been to Boston since I went to college. She had no memory of having gone there. One of Jeannie's daughters came to the house, and she and I gathered all kinds of items that Jeannie would recognize easily, and we decorated her room with photographs and little stuffed animals and bed quilts so that the day I was going to take her in, it was all set up for her. So the day she ended up in the nursing home, that morning we went out for breakfast, and after breakfast we went to a very secluded spot and we had a talk, and I said, do you remember how you told me how you were concerned that if anything were to happen to me, what would happen to you? I said, it's really reached that point where I can't take care of you any longer, and you need to have someone with you 24 hours a day, and I can't do that. And I've given this tremendous thought. I've talked to the family, and we've decided that the best place for you is for you to go into a nursing home. And she said, well, isn't there something we can do? Couldn't you maybe hire someone to come up to the house and spend time with me when you're not home? I said, well, you know, we've tried that for the last year and a half, and that's just no longer working. And my blessed wife turns to me and she said, well, Mo, if you feel that's what I need, then that's what I need. Took her to the nursing home, went into her room, she looked around, said, oh, I recognize these pictures and those plants, and she felt comfortable. I was told prior to bringing her into the nursing home to coordinate a story with family and staff. And her story was that because she had all these falls going on, that she needed to have constant rehabilitation to get stronger. And also, she's this exemplary counselor. And I said, there's a lot of people in the nursing home who are very lonely. And your job is to seek these people out, sit down with them, put your hand on theirs, and let them know that they're loved, that there's someone out there. And she easily took on those roles. It was splendid how she just assimilated herself. The people in the nursing home called her Nurse Jeannie. And they even set up a dummy file for her. So they would write some notes. It was actually the same notes they'd keep giving her day after day. And she'd pull out the file. The patient's name was Hans Solo. And she would transcribe the medical records into the file. And she felt very useful. And she did a lot of the counseling with other patients. many, many times. It was pretty wonderful.
I want to back up to something
Sure.
that I meant to earlier. So I think in fairness to the family, when you say the family wasn't able to support you with this, I think that the idea that it's every single day. So maybe they say, well, I could come on this Sunday or I could come on that afternoon. But the idea that when you ask for support with this condition, it really has to be consistent, and it's a 24-hour need. And sometimes people just aren't able to see that because the person seems so functional.
Yeah, and that's what happened too. So, her son would spend an hour with her in the afternoon, and then call me up and say, well, I don't know what the big deal is.
Right.
Mom was fine. And she remained social to the very last day on this planet.
And at family dinners or
Yep.
other events. I had meant to say that earlier, but something just reminded me of it again now. So I think that's an important thing to note, that you as the primary caregiver know that you really need to have continuous care. But the person coming in for that continuous care can feel after an hour, there's really no need for me to be here.
Exactly.
What am I doing here?
Well, I had a family meeting with the kids, and I told them what I was going through, and one of the sons said, well, I can come up every other Sunday and spend an hour with her and give you an opportunity to go up, maybe 2 hours. And then one of the daughters said, in the Sundays that he doesn't come up, I can come up. And I explained to them that 1 or 2 hours is nowhere near enough. It's days that I need off. I was eligible to receive respite grants from both Alzheimer's Association and Franklin County Home Care, so I could take off for a weekend and hire someone, and I never took advantage of those, Sue. It was so hard for me to let go of her. And if I was gone, I'd just be thinking about her. So there was little reason for me to take advantage of that, which is just more of how I was undermining my own health by doing this.
So now with Jeannie in the facility in your home,
Yeah.
how did your life change?
Well, the good news is she was close enough that I could visit her every day. And sometimes it'd just be a matter of a few minutes, and sometimes it'd be a matter of hours. Sometimes we'd go out for a ride, or we'd go out for lunch. But I came home and I'd walk through this big empty house that was indeed could be our retirement home, and I had no idea how to fill my life up. For so many years, I had been dedicating all my conscious time to taking care of my wife, and I no longer had that. And so it was a matter of re-identifying what my own personal needs were. And it gets a little bit stronger because I want to talk about August 15th.
Okay.
I get a phone call from the nursing home saying that Jeannie had been vomiting all night, and they were concerned that she was dehydrating, and they wanted her to go to the hospital, to the emergency room, so they could put her on IVs to bring up her fluid level.
Now, was this the first time that she had gone to the ER from the hospital? From the nursing home?
She had been there at least a half dozen times. She'd had falls. She had, one time she had a pulmonary embolism that wasn't that huge, but noteworthy. So I was kind of used to these phone calls, and dehydration was no big deal. I wasn't all that concerned about it.
And even though she was in the facility, they couldn't stop those falls either, right?
No.
They couldn't prevent the falls.
Well, she only fell once in the nursing home.
But she fell at home. I think I always feel like that's fair to point out that falls happen. It's not the fault of the caregiver.
No.
Sometimes they can't be prevented.
Yeah.
So this particular morning, she was vomiting.
Yep. So I go to the emergency room, and they already knew me by name. And the doctor came in and was very solemn. He says, we just did a CAT scan on your wife, and she's having a cerebral hemorrhage. She's having a brain bleed. He says, there's nothing we can do to stop it. She will not survive the day. The good news is she has no pain. This was about 9 o'clock in the morning. So I contacted the family and told them what's going on. Those who lived locally were able to come and spend the day with her. Each of us had our time to spend with her individually. You came that evening. Thank you so very much for being there at the time. And that evening, Jeannie made her final transition.